In this video, we're going to apply the bow tie analysis form of risk assessment to a specific example. The specific example we'll focus on is the large mining equipment from some of our previous explorations of risk and hazard, in particular part 2. So here we have the large mining vehicles moving around a site. What's the hazard? Well, hazards are typically related to a source of energy. So in this case we have mechanical energy in the form of the moving equipment, and the hazard is that moving equipment damaging something. So that's the center of our bow tie, the knot that holds the whole concept together. Now, what about the threats? What could cause this hazard to manifest as an unwanted event? So the left-hand side of our bow tie. What are the threats? Take a moment, brainstorm, and then we'll continue. And we're back. Okay. So, here's a list of some of the possible threats on the worksite with large vehicles. The large vehicles could collide with each other. We could have the large vehicles damage the shovel. The shovel could damage the small vehicles. The large vehicles could damage the small vehicles. These are all different combinations that would lead to threats. Now, obviously, we've only listed 4 here for brevity, but in a real bow tie analysis, you're going to brainstorm, come up with as many different possible threats as you can identify, because you want to be thorough in your analysis. So next, let's look at the right-hand side, the consequences. The consequences of these vehicles colliding are listed here in the slide on the right. We have things like fatalities, damage to equipment, loss of production, threat and damage to the company's reputation. These are all consequences if the unwanted event happens. So now we've got our bow tie is starting to take shape. We've got the threats on the left, the hazard tying everything together in the middle, and then the consequences on the right. Now we need to implement some control measures. So what do we put in place to avoid the threats manifesting as an unwanted event to release the hazard? Well, let's take a look at, we've got some examples here of different types of control measures and some different categories that they go into. Take a minute and look and sort the brown arrows in your mind into the yellow categories. I'll give you a moment. Feel free to pause the video. And we're back. So, the control measures are ways to avoid the unwanted events, and they have a number of different types which have various levels of effectiveness, as you'll recall from our earlier discussions. Design controls are generally going to be more effective than administrative controls. That discussion. Anyhow, so we've sorted them. You can compare our answers here to what you had, how you'd classified them yourself. By the same token, we also have recovery measures. So that's the right-hand side of the bow tie. So remember, the controls are the left-hand side of the bow tie to prevent the threats from manifesting as the hazard, and then the recovery measures are once the hazard manifests as an unwanted event, how do you recover? Well, we want to make sure that first aid and ambulances are readily available to reach the worksite in the event of a collision. We're going to make sure that our operators are wearing seatbelts so they don't get flung from stray vehicles. We're going to have procedures in place for proper signage so that large vehicles and small vehicles aren't ending up near each other. If there's a fatality or an injury, we're going to make sure that there's grief counseling available for all our staff. There's going to be engineering controls as well. There are engineering recovery measures like fire suppression systems. So those are what are occupying the right-hand side to prevent the hazard from manifesting as consequences. So you can see this bow tie analysis is actually really powerful. Everything's tied together from the hazard and branches out into the threats and consequences, and then the control and recovery methods to separate the hazard from the consequences and the hazard from the threats. This is a really powerful analysis technique that's good both for anticipating new risks and threats, and also for analyzing in the event, retroactively analyzing unwanted events from the past to identify ways to avoid them in the future. Now, whatever form of risk assessment tool you're using, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have a team with diverse backgrounds contributing to the risk assessment. Different people will bring different perspectives. The operators are going to have different perspectives than the supervisors are going to have a different perspective than the engineers. The experts in various subfields that are relevant to the design at hand. It's really important to get as many perspectives as possible so that you can cover each other's blind spots, essentially. The more diversity of perspective, the more hazards you'll be able to identify, the more threats and consequences you'll be able to identify, and the more comprehensive your risk assessment will be. And finally, when you assemble a team to be doing risk assessments using whatever combination of strategies are going to be used, it's really important that they have access to as much information as possible. They need access to all the records, all the relevant previous analyses, all the data about previous accidents and events. The risk assessment team needs to be able to make informed decisions, ideally as quantitatively as possible, so they need all the relevant information. If they don't have the relevant information, that's introducing blind spots and uncertainty that are going to undermine the effectiveness of the risk assessment. So they need to have all the relevant details so they can make informed quantitative decisions on risk. And that brings us to the end of Section 4. You may now proceed to Quiz 4 on risk assessment.